And on LinkedIn right now all the way through to the end. We will also be having a panel discussion, like I said, after this. But first, let's get a real understanding of what is in this report that is being brought here in terms of a formal launch to Africa for the first time. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, please let's put our hands together and welcome on stage UNFPA's Executive Director, Dr. Natalia 𝐇𝐚𝐩𝐸𝐾, to highlight some of the key findings of this report.
Thank you, dear Yvonne. Excellencies, Dr. Catherine, my dear sister, dear colleagues, dear young people. Habari za asubuhi. Siku njema wonekana asubuhi. I greet you in peace, foremost in our minds during turbulent times, and a constant concern for the women and young people UNFPA serves. The world has begun an unprecedented decline in fertility rates, leading many to fear an impending population collapse. At the same time, with more than 8 billion people sharing our planet, the human population has never been larger. And this too is sometimes called a crisis. Yet new evidence in our flagship State of World Population report shows us something else. UNFPA surveyed 14,000 people across 14 countries. And these were countries with high fertility rates and those with low fertility rates across all regions of the world, asking whether they wanted to become parents, and if so, how many children they would like to have. We also asked if they felt they would be able to realize these choices, and if not, why not? Our report finds that most people do want children, even in the countries with the lowest fertility rates in the world. In fact, most people surveyed want 2 or more children. Fertility rates are falling in large part because many feel unable to create the families they want. That is the real crisis. 1 in every 5 adults under the age of 50 said they probably will not have the number of children they want. Among those who were older and had completed their families, 31% had fewer children than they desired, and 12% had more. Why? Out of all the survey respondents who want to have children, more than half said economic barriers would likely lead them to have fewer children than they wanted. This finding is supported by the stories we hear from individuals. One young man in Benin Republic told us, "I'm not sure I have enough financial security to offer a stable and fulfilling life to a child." About a quarter of survey respondents said health issues would play a role in having fewer children than desired, and those issues included chronic illness, poor healthcare access, and infertility, which is widespread everywhere. In fact, according to Dr. Friday Okonofua, an eminent Nigerian obstetrician, infertility is the most common reason for gynecology visits in many African countries. Only 1 in 5 people surveyed said they were unlikely to achieve their desired family size because they were worried about conflicts, the environment, or the political climate they live in. A young woman in Ukraine told us that she wants children, but sees the hardships facing parents and children due to conflict. "I do not want to have such a life for myself and for my future kids," she said. At the same time, even as so many people struggle to reach their family goals, vast and unacceptable numbers of people, 1 in 3, according to our survey, experience unintended pregnancies. Hawa and her husband in Abuja, Nigeria, wanted to invest their scarce resources in the 2 children they already had. And then they became pregnant with a 3rd. We have reached our limit, Hawa said. We miss these profound human experiences when headlines and policymakers attribute falling global fertility solely to people opting out of parenthood. Our findings show the opposite. Many people are being forced into parenthood, and even more are being shut out of it. And there are major consequences for individuals and societies. For example, many countries are grappling with aging and shrinking populations, labor shortages, and rising healthcare and pension costs. These are real concerns, yet they're leading some to the wrong conclusions. Rather than promoting women's workforce participation, which is actually shown to improve economic productivity amid population aging, there is a growing insistence that women and young people have more children. In some cases, it may be the neighbor next door urging you to get married before it's too late. In others, it is the government putting up advertising saying the same thing. In some instances, it is countries imposing restrictions on the availability of contraceptives and other services. At the same time, we see LGBTQI+ people and single people often denied access to fertility services. Migrants are sometimes denied access to affordable maternity care. Marginalized communities have overall worse access to basic reproductive health services. These facts raise the question, who is considered worthy of the choice to start a family? History shows us that these kinds of restrictions often backfire. Lack of access to safe abortion leads to unsafe abortion, one of the leading contributors to maternal death globally. Among women who survive an unsafe abortion, many will experience infections that are then a cause of secondary infertility. Importantly, we also see that when people feel their reproductive choices are being steered, when policies are even just perceived as being coercive, people react and they're less likely to have children. Clearly, the answer lies not in limiting choice or selecting who gets to exercise choice. It lies in expanding access, expanding real choice to all people. Choices are expanded when adolescents are able to access reproductive health services, as we see through an innovative program in Kenya that is helping to reduce both HIV transmission and adolescent pregnancy rates, for example. And while policies are important, we do need to address social norms. We know, for example, that when women shoulder the full caretaking load at home, birth rates are depressed. We also know that more men actually want to be involved fathers, but they face social and workplace barriers, like lack of parental leave or stigma for taking care of their children. The online backlash against women's rights also contributes to a growing divide in the attitudes held by young men and young women. All of this plays a role in the so-called loneliness epidemic and in the lower rates of marriage and declining fertility. Finally, our survey shows that not enough people are learning the importance of consent when it comes to intimacy and family formation. Roughly 1 in 5 people said they felt pressure to have a baby even when they were not ready. 1/3 of women said that they were in a situation where they were pressured to have sex and felt unable to say no. And you may be surprised to hear that 1/4 of men in our survey said they've had the same experience. UNFPA has a universal mandate to uphold reproductive rights and choices everywhere for everyone. That means helping people to plan their families and ultimately achieve their desired number of children, whatever that number may be, even if it's 0. The research in this independent report is designed to spark a conversation and to prompt new thinking. It contains some hard truths about all the barriers people face when making the most intimate, consequential decision of their lives, whether and when to become a parent. It also points out solutions: flexibility in the workplace, accessible child care, affordable housing, all ease the path to parenthood. Ending sexist norms would also help all of us, in all our diversity, realize our fertility aspirations. So, let us rally behind the basic human right of all people to decide freely and responsibly the number and timing of their children. This includes providing the full range of healthcare services that enable people to realize those decisions. And let's work together towards a world where young people believe their children will thrive, a world that is sustainable, a world that is safe and just, a world at peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being so succinct and giving us an overview of that. What a powerful thing. So I'm a note taker, so I scribble and I write notes and things that stand out, and I think that's the most important, giving people the right to agency, to freely decide what it is they need. Now, and of course, like you said, Dr. 𝐸𝐚𝐩𝐸𝐸, this is about spurring conversation and sparking it. So we'd asked some of you at the start, what were some of your reflections on this? I'll just summarize some of them, and then I want to hear from you if this is what you actually said. The handwriting for some of it was a little, but let me see if I summarized it correctly. The challenges to reproductive choice, the need for a committed partner. One says experience job insecurity and high housing costs. Another said societal expectations in the Maasai community that values many children, but I have economic and climate crisis concerns. Deciding when to conceive and the ability to receive care. One says, as we've heard now from the report, I had the firstborn at age 35 due to career and education goals and lack of financial support system. I don't know if, is this accurate? Did we capture it? Can somebody just confirm? Maybe I need somebody to propose, a proposer and a seconder or something of these views. Anyone, just put up your hand, just keep it brief. It doesn't have to be your view, it can be your reflections from the report. Anyone? Anyone? I'm going to pick somebody. One person. Yes, one person. And I'm going to pick a man, actually. And you know you're smiling at me. Gentleman with the glasses. Yes, you. In the gray suit over there on the other side. Maybe you could go round back. I just want to hear some basic reflections on what you've heard so far. It doesn't have to be your personal view if you don't want to share that. Just let's have this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. Caught very on a way, but it was very interesting to listen to Natalie say those words. Very enriching. And maybe from a perspective of being a man, I have learned a whole lot around choices. All right, they're a lot deeper than the conventional thought process around them. And I do think that this is quite a great forum that really showcases that, and we could really learn a lot from those are my top of my head, my reflections.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. I think we will come back to you, by the way, so please be ready with your questions, comments, thoughts, and reflections, because we're going to have this conversation now with the panel conversation. And you're right, it's about perhaps turning conventional thinking on its head and actually not just hearing people, but listening keenly to some of the experiences that they portray. And like we've talked about, it's in private sector, it's in health, it's also with the work conditions, men, women, young people as well. So I'd like us to have this conversation. Like I said, Q&A is after that. So allow me to invite here on stage Dr. Anthony Ajayi, who's a research scientist here at the African Population and Health Research Center. Thank you very much for being with us. And then from private sector, please take a seat right there. Yes. From private sector to talk about those workplace policies that Dr. Natalia Kanem talked about, Dr. Amit Thakkar, who's the chairman of the Africa Healthcare Federation. Karibu sana. Please sit right next to Dr. Ajayi there. And then right after that, let's hear also from the young people once again. Bitania Lulu is a program director for Y Act. We'll be hearing more about that. Welcome. And last, certainly not least, is Ms. Julia Bunting, who's the director of the program division at UNFPA. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give the panel a warm round of applause as we begin the conversation. So thank you for making time for us. I think let's begin with hearing the youth perspective that we've already heard quite a bit from. But you're a youth advocate and policy expert, Lulu. So from your insights, what are the main barriers that young people face when making this all-important decisions of their lives?
Thanks, Yvonne. It's not a homogeneous group. Young people are very diverse. They have varying realities. They come from different cultural and educational backgrounds. So that also determines what their barriers are. And also, the African Union defines youth as from age 15 to 35. That's about 20 years, right? So 15-year-olds obviously may not have the same problems that a 35-year-old that is exiting the youth bracket. So it's very important to see that age-appropriate empathy when we're designing these proposals, projects, policies, to really resonate with teenagers, young adults, and young professionals per se. With that said, what all young people desire and what makes them common is their pursuits to economic stability and self-reliance. And the growing number of youth unemployment and underemployment, and at the same time limited access to finance and different opportunities also hinder the freedom of choice that these young people have. So that's the major barrier, which is the economic freedom.
Yeah.
Second point.
Yeah, you can go up. Go ahead with the second one, and then we will come back and talk about a few more.
Okay, second point would be the cultural taboo.
Yeah.
Still, we've been advocating for a study chart to be normalized, to be, for comprehensive education to reach young people, but still it's a taboo. I come from an educated family. I've never discussed family planning with my parents until I got married, and now they're asking for grandchildren. So now I can talk about it, but still,
Yeah.
that lack of comprehensive education to sexual and reproductive health is a huge hindrance, even in the cities, not only marginalized communities.
All right.
But looking at a 15-year-old in the rural settings who don't have any say on when she gets to get married, how many, or if at all, how many children she wants to have, that's another barrier that young adults face. But then fast forward to career women in their early 30s, grappling between climbing the career ladder at the expense of starting their families as another flip of
that's a real crisis and a real challenge that they face. And thank you for reminding us that you're not homogeneous. It's not just one group. And so you have to make sure that you tailor and adapt any messaging, any approaches, and all decisions that are made. I want us to now take a look at another group that perhaps every time we talk about these issues, we talk about it from the women perspective, but this is a gender conversation, and I think we were reminded of that by our member of the audience. Dr. Ajayi, let's talk about gender inequality for a minute in terms of the reproductive choices that both men and women have to make. As a researcher, a research scientist, Tell us about gender inequality and how that affects the people's reproductive choices. And note, we're saying people, not just women's reproductive choices, right?
Thank you very much. I co-lead our work on adolescent sexual and reproductive health. I know there's a lot of focus on adolescent pregnancy, how do we reduce teenage pregnancy and all that. But at the other end of the spectrum, I see there was an article recently that says young people do not want to have children. In fact, there are so many young people now that says, I don't want to have babies at all. So again, that's another end of the spectrum. But both of these issues are affected by gender norms and gender inequality. I think one big one is the taboo around this discussion about sex itself. Parents do not want to talk about sex. Teachers don't want to do it. Aunties in the community are supposed to be the savior. They also probably are doing a terrible job at that. So without discussing the choices available to young people to enable them prevent pregnancies, for example, then we begin to see lots of young people getting pregnant when they are not ready, when they are not emotionally prepared. You see the young person talking about being emotionally prepared, being economically ready and all that. So we need to have this conversation with young people. And when I mean young people, I'm also talking about boys. Because boys likely believe that this conversation, should be, held with girls. And then, they just probably think it's unimportant. But it's really important because what research has shown is that when young boys, for example, are aware of sexual and reproductive health options, then they make informed decisions, they make better decisions. They are even much more supportive and they are better prepared to start a family when they are ready. So norms around talking about sex is really important, but that's not limited to that. It's also about norms around who does what in the domestic work in the household. Depending on the research you're looking at, 3 to 10 times, female are 3 to 10 times more likely to do domestic chores compared to male. That also needs to change. As you know, young women are also working just like the men. They also, earn resources like the men. So it's really unfair if they have to shoulder all the domestic responsibilities. So again, we need to talk about gender inequality in terms of how we share roles in the family. I'll stop at that for now, but okay. I mean, there are a lot of norms we can talk about that in the access to choices.
Yes, and we'll come back to that. And I just want to go from that perhaps straight to, because you've talked about the gender roles that are happening at the home, but those same people are also facing roles that they have at the workplace and at the career, in their career progression. Dr. Thacker, let's talk about workplace policies and how these can assist work-life balance in general. Like we're hearing, there's cultural norms about who shoulders what sort of responsibilities at the home. Those same people, men and women, then have responsibilities at the workplace. So what is that work-life balance and how important is that in terms of a conversation around fertility?
Thanks. And I think this conversation is important. If you heard the 4 youth coming up and you saw what was presented, the future is an uncertain future. And so many of the statistics were also hinged around economic certainty. And if you look at the youth right now, they want to bring in children to have a size of family which they can give a good family life. That's the balance. And workplace plays an important role because they will look for a meaningful job in a meaningful society and be very happy with the number of children they have. Now the workplace has evolved so rapidly, in the last few, I would say in the last decade. COVID has repositioned us at the workplace quite rapidly with the working from home, remote work. But 3 things, in my opinion, might be very useful in sparking the conversation that the ED spoke about. Technology, AI, and robotic models. So, with AI and technology being embedded, the kind of workforce balance will start changing rapidly. And the robotic engagements are becoming very important. So the humanoid robotic balance is an interesting report we should launch in about 5 years to 10 years, because it's a serious matter. It's a very serious matter. And if you'll see the workplace, it will evolve into where can those robotic engagements make work more efficient. Now, getting back to your point, how can we make the workplace harmonized to bring that balance is very important right now. In fact, corporates have moved from those days of just having offices to even having mothers' rooms. And some of the organizations even have play schools or creche around it, which makes it easier for working mothers not to have a struggle between their career and the family. And how much more can we do in this space, both for men and women? You've also seen the corporates are taking leadership in the private sector about enabling them access reproductive health services, family planning services. We heard from Dr. Amot about UHC. You know, covering health is another big thing. You heard.
Yeah.
Some of these youth were worried about bringing children who will not have access to healthcare.
Right.
And women who are in their career lives sometimes are worried because they might not get access to effective health services. So we've intentionally launched the Coalition for Women's Health in Africa. It's the first unique private sector platform of which UNFPA is a technical partner. 21 corporates are leading from the front to bring an effective harmonized engagement for women to have a better livelihood in Africa. Let me stop there.
Okay, all right, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about what best practice looks like in the private sector. I've seen some corporates are giving perhaps longer maternity leave to mothers, longer paternity leave to fathers as well, and there's been a lot more developments even beyond just the simple creche.
But just
we'll
to
Yes.
mention that, I'd really like the audience to sort of find out, and we should do a report.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a very big debate, and it's an interesting economic debate.
Okay.
If you give women longer maternity leave, will you economically position them with a disadvantage or an advantage? It's not a matter for this, but I think the crowd, the team here will be able to see whether this will help us for better and stronger families, or it might work the reverse. Worth a discussion.
Okay. You can see the
I
reaction
know.
that
It's
has
a good
sparked.
rule.
We will come back and talk about that. That's an interesting one. So a lot of conversations about what's happening in the workplace. Your questions, comments, I see them, I hear them, I can feel the room. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit. There was something that Dr. 𝐸𝐚𝐩𝐸𝐸 talked about in her remarks, that even in the countries with low birth rates, people who are interviewed there still say they want to have children. And so I think that is important, especially for many countries that are looking to increase their birth rates. Ms. Bunting, what works in those countries that are seeking to increase their fertility rates? What doesn't work? What should we be doing different now with the nuances and understanding we now have from this report?
Thanks, Yvonne. So, I mean, contrary to a lot of what's going on in the media at the moment, as you noted in the report notes, that most people do want to have children, and in fact many want more than they're able to have. So the question we have to ask is what is limiting them being able to achieve their reproductive intentions? And what we see is, of course, that it's not homogeneous. As you said, young people are not homogeneous, but the reasons why people aren't achieving their reproductive intentions are also very different. Different for different people in different places and over people's life courses. And so everything from financial barriers to issues around social and gender norms, issues around their ability to have children, physically the reproductive health issues, access to care. So a whole range of different issues that governments really need to start thinking about, recognizing again this is about individual choice, and governments are not able to governments really create barriers to enabling people to achieve those reproductive intentions. So how do they make sure that policies and programs address it? But it's absolutely not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah. For that, with respect to countries, let's take a look at these topics that we've talked about that you were saying are varied across, the different demographics. But how should we be thinking about all of these issues together? Like, we've stated the problem, I think, from different perspectives. So what's the sort of cohesive thinking around that? How do we start to do this to get some clarity? Because we've clearly stated the problem. We know what that is. So where do the solutions lie? Let's start with you. Yeah.
So I think it's, as we said, it's how do we make sure that we can create better lives for parents, for children, for families in all the diversities? What are the range of different tools and opportunities that people need access to in order them to achieve that? So it's everything from paid employment and decent jobs. As we've heard, it's affordable housing. We heard that from the youth testimonials. It's access to good quality education that allows you again to get the jobs. It's work on social and gender norms. That means that it's not just a responsibility of women, it's also the role of men, both in child raising, child rearing, but also in terms of role in the domestic life. Who has those domestic responsibilities? And we see that too often those burdens still tend to fall to women.
Yeah, and you see this, I suppose, Ms. Bunting, from the perspective that UNFPA has such a broad range of programs, right? What for you would be some of the key ones, to focus on? It's everything from sexuality education, gender-based education, preventing HIV, like we've talked about even with Dr. 𝐸𝐧𝐬, teen pregnancies. It's such a wide range. How do we focus? What do we do towards moving us forward?
So it all really comes down to enabling people to achieve their rights and to achieve their choices. Okay. And all of these issues are interconnected. So enabling young people, as Britannia said, to have access to good quality, comprehensive sexuality education that is age appropriate, that supports them in making those choices, understanding about bodily autonomy and relationships. It's about making sure that people have access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care, whether that's access to contraception to enable them to delay and space and when they choose to limit the number of pregnancies, or whether it's access to assisted reproductive health technologies to enable them to achieve pregnancies that they want to achieve. So it's really making sure that we can provide a comprehensive range of services that, again, are centered very much on individual rights and choices.
And that's a good way to put it. It's access to choices and decision making that would be important. Lulu, where do you see the interventions that would help young people realize their reproductive desires?
Well, building on what Julia has said, surely one size doesn't fit all. Also when you're talking about young people. So we really have to empathize and co-create with young people and meet them where they are. A young person in Narok doesn't have the same realities with a young person in Kilifi. With the work that we've done, for example, with AMREF and Y-Act, the young people in Kilifi told us that their priority in terms of accessing sexual reproductive health is the parental consent. They don't want parental consent to be able to go and access care. In Bungoma County, that wasn't the issue. The issue was integrating youth-friendly, affordable and accessible services within the health post. So really understanding the community, the priorities of young people, and co-creating with them, and integrating meaningful engagement throughout. It's not just to identify the issues, but to design these policies to actually implement and monitor the progress together with young people. We want to really deliver sustainability. The other thing is, when we're talking about corporate and the HR policies, family-friendly and conducive HR policies are really important for young women to be encouraged enough to realize the dreams they have to create their families of their own. It's, of course, there's progress, but I beg to differ. Not every corporate wants to hire a young woman that is married and not have children. I was having this conversation with my husband earlier, and he was telling me how corporate, during the interview session, they ask you, are you married? Do you have children? If you say no, you're out. So there's a lot to be done
Yeah.
to really support young women that are at the childbearing age, but also are in the workforce that don't want to also lose out on economic freedom.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say is that multi-sector engagement and government ownership. When we're talking about meaningful engagement, it's not UNFPA's jobs or it's not AMREF's job. It's all sectors engaging young people, continuing the conversation to deliver for young people across the continent.
Yeah, and that's really important. You talked about understanding cultural nuances and reality, and I think Dr. Ahmad had mentioned that in some of the interventions that they're making, is that it's culturally appropriate because, you know, what matters in one community, in one sector,
Yeah.
even within an urban region, those
Exactly.
realities
Very
can be
different.
very different.
Just to
And-
add one thing though.
Yes, go ahead.
There was a mention of technology,
Yes.
and we've
Yeah.
seen with the Gen Z movement, especially in Kenya, how young people can self-organize.
Yeah.
And if we really want comprehensive sexuality education to reach young people, we should meet them where they are, at the fingertips, at their
Yeah.
phones. Use of technology, TikTok, social media platforms, they can easily access that to make informed decision of their life. So in AI, it's not only for the workplace,
Yeah.
but for really pushing valuable and age-appropriate information and education for young people.
Okay, yeah, that's really, really interesting. So from you, Dr. Thakkar, I just want to hear from you what, I think the conversation had started, what best practice looks like in private sector that then supports the men and the women to achieve their reproductive desires. What works? What are some of the solutions?
So, you know, private sector is looking at fair practices best. You know, private sector is also very much in a competitive environment globally, whether you're in the US, Europe, Africa. So they want to find fit for purpose HR best practices that supports both gender. And to be honest, the private sector is beginning to realize valuable employment, what it means. And they are modeling it around, first, the legal structure of the country. So if you look at the Kenyan laws, for example, we want to be compliant. Compliant for paternity leave, compliant for maternity leave, compliant to what? So country laws play a very important role on how the gender, comfort, and engagement in the private sector works. Remember, many private sector will say, at least I'm bare minimum. They want to be bare minimum and they want their product or service to be
Optimal.
priced at a
Yes.
certain level and they find a market. But there are some corporates who will go way above. They might say from 90 days we'll make it 120 days, 180 days. But it's a cost. And that cost somebody has to pay. That somebody is usually the client, the customer pays. And we need to make the products and services affordable. So the best practices is finding a balance in the country you operate and the HR policies that suit the legal environment, but making it a good work-life harmony model. And this happens as a discussion around usually leadership and human capital divisions in a company.
Yeah, just before we move to you, Dr. Ghea, you mentioned something very interesting. There's a cost to it,
Right.
Obviously, and that is borne on the other side by the consumer. Do you think there is an opportunity to speak to the wider populace in terms of saying, look, for us to be able to have a more balanced workforce, it's going to cost all of us, and there is a cost that's going to come to you.
Right.
Do you think the consumer is educated enough or made more aware, and that they're able to shoulder that cost, or is that something
It's
we
a
need
good
to
question.
work on?
I think it's a good question, and I think if anyone did a study, it is directly related to the GDP of that country. So as the GDP grows, the consumer is willing to pay that extra, so we take a shared responsibility. In countries where GDP is still struggling, if you went today and said Safaricom, we will all pay 1 shilling extra because we are extending maybe the gender benefits to be appropriate, you might find resistance. Whereas in other countries, they're willing to take the cost. It's probably similar to this carbon credit discussions we are having. We are protecting the planet and maybe we should get a better rate of our financing than many parts of the world. It's a valid discussion. So if corporates are being very best practice and balanced around gender HR practices,
Yeah.
could the population and the consumers share in that responsibility? That's your question.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it's worth a test, worth a try, but
Okay.
in developing countries, it's a tough call.
Okay, perhaps there would be a way to see if it's a win-win for everybody. If you're able to pay more as a consumer, you understand why. I don't know. Anyway, that's just a whole other conversation we could get into.
Just
but
one
maybe
more
just
thing.
a way to frame it as a win-win. Maybe
So-
even for the consumers, if they're able to pay a little
I
more,
wonder-
they would understand what that is.
I wonder if
But I
there's
don't
a
wanna dwell
country,
on it
we've
too
had
much.
affordable housing levy here. We're all paying, right? And I'm wondering, is there a gender-based levy anywhere in the world to ensure that there's effective, good practices being placed, even in civil society and in private, not only private sector, even government. Let's also talk about government employment rules. And if they could even make it even a bigger fair practices, work in the civil service, in the ministries, and you should look at what are the best practices.
Fair enough.
But anyway, great discussion.
Fair enough. You're sparking a lot of fires here and a lot of conversation, which I suppose is what this is all about. Dr. Ajayi, let's talk about, I think, what we've seen and what we've heard from this report, and maybe this is as we look towards solutions, because this report is coming out at a time when there is major backlash against women's rights, their reproductive rights, there's men on the other hand who are also, like you said, harmed by sort of the gender inequality nuances that we see. So where is the solution in terms of, you know, ensuring that gender equality is something that is part of the solution to this conversation?
Thank you very much, and you're absolutely right. You know, in the work I do, we monitor some of these backlash we see, and it's deeply concerning, I must say. Whether it's on social media, whether it's in the communities, we do our work, we see backlash on a daily basis. And I mean, some of these backlashes are also felt by misinformation about the true nature of our work, or the way people understand the work we do when it comes to promoting gender equality. And but I think we need to begin by changing the narrative. Work around gender inequality, promotion of gender inequality should not be seen as a fight against men, or you know. Again, we need to be careful with the way we frame it, but more importantly, we need to change the way people understand gender equality. Because a lot of men are concerned. I was, you know, following the debate in Parliament in Nigeria when they tabled a bill for gender equality, and then, you know, you see the men fighting tooth and nail to say this bill should not pass because men and women are not equal, and so it's troubling. You know what I mean? So, how do we frame these as something we should cooperate on, as opposed to as something as against something as pitting men against women? I think that's really important. But also, I think we also need to tackle misinformation on the internet. There are lots of men now that have become, you know, they've gained notoriety in, you know, saying they are fighting for men, but they are actually the one spreading this information, this misinformation, and they are there in all countries. In Kenya, I mean, most people here in the room will probably be able to point to the men that are spreading this information on social media. But also, there's also a global, well-known men that do that. But all of these are as a result of ignorance, I would say, because gender equality, you know, benefits both men and women. Gender inequality, it's also harmful for men, because men tend to shoulder responsibilities that they probably shouldn't. Men tend to have ideals of masculinity that's probably toxic to their own, you know, mental health, and it's important that we have all of this conversation by including men. But education is also really important. Education is crucial, and it must start early. You know, we need to begin to, you know, sell the idea of ideal masculinity to young people in their, as early as 10 to 14. I believe that's when we should start, because that's when men learn about gender inequality. So But also, it's also about what we demonstrate to them at home as parents as well. We need to also be ideal models to young people in our homes. Young people need to learn about integrity, empathy. You know, interestingly, we did a study recently where we want Africans to conceptualize masculinity and positive masculinity. But the interesting finding is, you know, people were able to separate positive masculinity from negative masculinity. They were able to separate even traditional masculinity as not conflicting with positive masculinity. So what they advocated for is a rejection of negative masculinity and a promotion of positive masculinity that value women, that value, you know, respect to all persons, that shun violence, and then that also promotes reproductive rights for all, including men and women. So it's important that we have men as allies, not as competitors in the space. It's important that we have programs that engage fathers, young people, teachers, male champions. Under the Spotlight Initiative, we collaborated with UNFPA as well as UN Women on Spotlight Initiative. And we did a small study as part of this study in Malawi where they have these barbershop toolbox. And they use it to train about over 3,000 male champions. And interestingly, when we spoke to the beneficiaries, they felt that they have better knowledge of this issue.
Right.
And some of them now says, now I understand that some of the things I believe are actually harmful to myself.
Yeah.
So it's important that we engage men, we engage young people, that men have models. The model should not necessarily be perfect men.
Yes.
Because there are no perfect men, but we can have champions that in their own right can do a good job in engaging men and boys.
Yeah, just to add, there are no perfect women either. There are no perfect humans. But that's really important that you mentioned framing, misinformation, education, and investing as well in them and creating allyship. We have come to the end of this. Look, one comment. One comment or question? Just one? And then the rest of this can continue. Okay, I'll take two, but it has to be really 1 minute. Let's start here and then we will come down here. Yes, I see you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for the panel. Very quickly. Julia, you mentioned about assisted reproduction. In many parts of Africa, we do not have legal and policy frameworks, but we know that there is assisted reproduction ongoing. And it's really unfair that it's only women who have couples or women who have economic ability who are able to access this. And we need to make sure this is accessible to everybody because of the infertility issues that we see. And this is a challenge to our DG there. Let's have some policy. Let's have that conversation. Secondly, very quickly, we focus a lot on, and it's good focus, on women and girls during the stage when we can reproduce. And then we stop focusing on women when we begin our perimenopause and menopause. And we are saying we need this conversation right in the center. Women are suffering. Our providers don't even know what is happening to us. We don't even know what is happening to us. Our quality of life is so poor. We need UNFPA to begin to focus. We need a conversation on menopause. Thank you.
Very important. Let's come down here. Lady in the white jacket, second row to this end. And that's important, like end to end, right?
Across the life cycle.
Yes, complete the life cycle. Yes, that's right. Thank you very much for that. Yes.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Mine is just an observation as the lady in red was speaking about stakeholders' engagement. I just wonder, where are we leaving the religious leaders, the faith actors? They have control over these issues. Yeah. So as we engage other members, it's important that we consider the feelings and the views of the religious leaders. And then the next comment, we are talking about gender equality, male and female. Where are the non-binary gender diversity?
Thank you. Some very good reflections. Ladies and gentlemen, you see this is what happens when you spur conversation and you spark it. It shows you there's a lot more, and there's a lot more of that as well in the report, the real fertility crisis. And these are some of the things that we need to be thinking about. Thank you very much for those reminders. I'm afraid that's all we have time for with respect to that. However, this conversation doesn't have to end here. We're going to be having lunch in a moment. We're also going to be in our various spaces where we work, where we live, where we worship, you know, at the bar, at the restaurant, you know, wherever it is that we congregate. That's the point of this report. And so with that, I think I want to thank you all for participating in that. And just a reminder, if there's any points that you've missed from this, complete recording of this will be available on YouTube in just a moment. And I think it is at this point we want to say thank you to all of you here. Thank you to those who have been joining us on the live stream. As we say goodbye to those who are joining us on the live stream, please let's give a warm round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much for taking the time to create some insights and some thoughts around that. Please, you may take your seats. You may exit the stage on that end of things. And so we will come back for a photo. Just give us a moment. We will come back for a photo.